Hi folks, today we're going to look at some lenses, particularly this lens. This is the Xenon 50mm full frame prime lens from Schneider's range. There are 6 of these now. They just released the 18mm version. This one goes, I think, for about 3,360 is the list price. These are fairly mid-range, and they're very good. They're very neutral. People say they go warm. I think they're a little cool. That probably means that somewhere between the two is the truth, and I suspect they're probably quite neutral. They're very rectilinear. They don't have too much distortion, at least when you use them as Super 35 cameras. They are full-frame lenses, which is of course increasingly important because more and more cameras are starting to use larger chips now. Any lens will have slightly poorer corner performance on a bigger sensor, but that's reasonably well controlled on these. And if you were to own a set of lenses, this would be a reasonable choice. They don't force a look on the image. They're very clean, they're quite rectilinear, and they work quite nicely on a variety of things. Particularly they are interchangeable mount. We'll talk about that some more later on. But this isn't the sort of lens that most people actually start off using. Most people these days start off on something a little bit more like this. This is the venerable Canon EOS 50D, which we talked about a few weeks ago in terms of using it as a very, very low-cost way into shooting RAW, which it does to some extent with the Magic Lantern firmware. On the front of here we have the Canon EFS 60mm macro prime. That's an f2.8 lens. They go for about 200 quid. It's not really an ideal moving picture lens at all. It's one of the only 2 lenses that Canon make in the EFS system, which is a prime lens. They only have 2 primes. One of them is this. It's very, very good for still photography. It's very good for doing very small objects because of the macro feature. And I have used it with things like Ursa Mini to do macro work with. It works very nicely. Otherwise, it's not ideal for a moving picture lens. The focus travel is very tiny. It's an infinitely rotating focus because I can keep doing this forever. The focus travel is there, and as you can probably tell, it's a little sticky, it's sort of grindy, it's not very nice to use. And of course there is no mechanical iris control. The only way to control the iris is through the electronics. So something like an Ursa Mini can control the iris, but there's no way of doing a smooth iris pull or anything like that. So people quickly get frustrated with this sort of thing. Fine lenses of stills photography device, nice macro features, sometimes useful, but not really something you want to be using day in, day out as your go-to moving picture lens. What tends to happen is that people buy things like this. Now this is a Nikon early 80s, probably 82, 83 sort of vintage Series E lens. Now the Series E were built to be economy lenses for the enthusiastic amateur who at that time could not afford the what's now called the AI and AIS lenses that were being sold at that time to professionals, which were very expensive and have become very expensive again now because people like to use them for moving image work. The Series E stuff can be had very cheaply. I was able to put together the whole set of these for I think 600 quid. So you know, you get the 28, the 35, the 50, the 100, the 135. Nikon did not call them Nikkor. They didn't use the Nikkor branding. It's look in the front there. It simply says Nikon Lens Series E. It does not say Nikkor. They didn't want to sort of besmirch their brand with a lens that had plastic parts. These have plastic parts. The iris ring is plastic. Now, I'll defer to the opinion of the great Ken Rockwell on these, who thinks that certainly the 50 is very good, and I tend to agree. It's very clean, pretty sharp. It is an f1.8 lens, and it performs reasonably well at f1.8. There are some problems. The first problem is that the focus markings are, well, utterly meaningless on these. I mean, there are numbers on the ring, as you can see there, but they mean next to nothing. There's no real calibration of that, especially once we have this adapter stacked on the back. The flange focus distance has to be exactly right for these distance markings to mean anything. So you can't set it to 1 meter and hope that really there's a focus distance of 1 meter set. That's hoping for too much. The other problem is that it goes from, well, I can't see the imperial markings here because they're behind this gear, but really it's roughly 2 feet minimum object distance, and it goes from there to 1 meter in half the travel. And it goes from 5 meters, 20 feet, to infinity in that much travel. So once you've got something that's 20 feet away and you want to pull focus on it accurately, well, it's a little bit difficult. There are shots you legitimately cannot do with this lens. There are shots you cannot do because you can't pull focus on them adequately because there's that much travel. Now you can do things with scale expansion with remote focus devices. You can do all kinds of things, but there are absolute limitations, or certainly reasonable limitations, when you don't want to go up to a shot with 100 takes because you keep buzzing focus, because that's your focus travel for the shot. That doesn't really work very well. The iris, of course, is clicky. They are mechanical lenses, so you do have iris control, but the iris is clicky. You can declick these. Unfortunately, it is pretty destructive. You can do it with a pair of wire cutters. You just take the mount off the back and crop a little tab off of this ring. But unfortunately, that is destructive. I've not chosen to do it to these because it does make a mess of them. But you know, there are limitations with this. It works to a degree. It's probably better than a fully electronic stills lens, but there are limitations. Once you outgrow this, then you need to go to something like this. This, for instance, let's just examine the differences. If you want to go from 15 feet to infinity on this lens, that's 15 feet, that's infinity. So that's the difference between, you know, 1/12 of a turn and best part of a quarter of a turn. The last focus mark before infinity on this lens is 150 feet. So you can be a long way from this lens, and this is a 50mm lens. A subject 150 feet away is going to be small in frame. You can go from 150 feet to infinity between the last two marks. The way that's done is quite interesting. If we look at this, if we work the focus mode action there, you can see that it's extending outwards. It's moving upwards at a pretty much consistent rate as I turn the mechanism. Okay? You can see that it moves pretty much the same amount per degree rotation of that focus mechanism, regardless of where we are. This, on the other hand, is quite difficult because it has 300 degrees of focus rotation. But if I turn it consistently, at least as best I can, what you're looking at is this edge moving at this bit against this bit of metal. It goes up and down as we focus, as you can see. If I go from that all the way down, it starts off moving quickly and it moves slower and slower and slower. Go back up the other way, and it starts off moving slowly, and then towards the end it rushes up to meters. Moves upwards much more quickly towards the end of the throw than towards the beginning. The reason it does that is that this lens does not use a simple screw thread to move the elements about, which means that the lens elements move the same amount for every amount that we rotate the focus ring. In this lens there is a cam-based mechanism which allows that to be controlled, so that at one end we get more movement than we do at the other end when we rotate the focus ring, which makes it possible to do a shot of someone who's running from, you know, what do you want to do, 60 feet away to 150 feet away, and actually have them be sharp, because this is a T2.1 lens. It opens right up. I mean, there's a very large hole through the middle of this lens for the light to go through, because it's a full frame lens, it's a fast lens. If you want that to be in focus, you need much more control than something like that will give you. This gives you that control. Of course, it has built-in gears. It has built gearing for both the focus and the iris. They're all a consistent size as well. I mean, this is the 50. That's the 100. So when I take the 50 off and put the 100 on, they're both lined up. I don't have to completely reconfigure the front end of the camera. Compare the 50 and the 100 in these. They're a completely different size. They don't line up at all. Better than that, the focus rotation as we saw on these goes around, well, 3/6 of a turn. It goes around, I can't even turn it all the way by hand. Now that can sometimes be a downside if you're actually operating on your own, if it's not a drama sort of situation. You can't actually focus from end to end on these in one sort of twist of the wrist, as it were. That can be a downer. But these are really designed for a sort of single camera drama situation where you have a focus puller and a follow focus, and you're doing it all in that sort of way. So we've talked a lot about conveniences, things like the longer focus rotation, the fact that they're all the same size and the same sort of weight, the fact that they're in interchangeable mounts. Those are all conveniences. Those are nice things to have. What we haven't talked about is pictures. Now, it's difficult to show you pictures on a compressed internet stream like this. I don't propose to try and make this an objective lens test. That's not what we're here to do. But one of the principal things that you get with a proper set of lenses like this is consistency. There is no design constraint on a stills lens that says it has to be consistent with others in the range. For instance, the little Nikon E50 here is a reasonably good lens. The 28mm lens in that range is unfortunately rather less good. Now that's the one that you're looking through right now. For instance, it breathes, well, I don't know what the technical term for this is, but that is a lot of breathing. That's end to end, and that's a lot of breathing. These breathe far less. In terms of sharpness, particularly in full frame, of course when you're using a full frame sensor you're seeing the corners, and that's where the sharpness tends to fall off. Of course sharpness does fall off in the corners on all lenses, but these are much better controlled than something like the 28mm that you're looking through right now. There's things like flaring, there's contrast issues, all of which can cause matching problems between lenses. These are designed to match. So we've done a lot of comparison, and we've talked about why these lenses are built the way they are. These particular lenses, these Xenon full frame primes, are a particularly good general purpose lens, in as much as they have a very neutral character. They're mid-range in price. It's the sort of thing that you might like to own. Unfortunately, I don't own these. These are the demo set that Schneider's UK distributor Manfrotto have sent in for us to look at. I should say I've not been paid by any of the manufacturers whose products we've talked about here. We are grateful to Schneider for sending these lenses for us to have a look at, and to Aperture and to JVC who have supplied the lighting and the camera equipment that we've been using here. I hope it's been useful to talk about some of the differences between a nice, well-built drama lens like this and some of the other options that exist, and why that lens and that lens, despite looking quite similar on paper, are really quite different in reality.